Welcome to the Cult is King podcast. I'm your host, the Duke, here with my co-host, Rambling Bones.
Hello again to everyone out there.
Before we get started here, what is it we actually do here, Bones?
Well, here on the Cult is King podcast, we talk about cult movies, B-movies, obscure film, anything we want to, pretty much.
And today, the movie in question is House of Wax, 1953.
As opposed to House of Wax, Paris Hilton edition. I don't know the date it came out.
I want to say it was 2004, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Well, it's actually kind of interesting because when I was looking through our comments, somebody had requested that we compare this at some point later to the 2004 House of Wax. But what you might not realize is that this one itself is a remake. In fact, it's a remake of Mystery at the Wax Museum, which was made in 1933.
Yes, and also if you didn't catch that, this was a fan-requested film, so we do listen to our fans.
Yes, all
Sometimes,
10 of you.
All 10 of you.
We love you.
But this was based off of Mystery at the Wax Museum, which was based off of a 3-act play. And this movie is sort of important because it was the first color film to be filmed in 3D
By a major studio.
by a major studio.
I don't know if there were any color 3D films before this, but I know this was the first time that something like this was attempted by a major studio.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because the film that this is a remake of was also a notable step forward because it was a 2-color Technicolor thing at a time when any color at all or any color techniques were still in their infancy.
Yeah, some silent films you had stained frames, but actually having consistent color throughout was not an easy task.
So it's kind of funny because, these first 2 Wax Museum movies kind of, pushed the mold a little bit. And then the third one had Paris Hilton.
Really? Yeah, it was pushing the boundaries. And that is all the comparisons we can make at this time between the 3.
No, but before I go into the synopsis, one thing, if you guys are interested, we mostly cater to just doing reviews right now and synopsises and trivia, but if at any point you would like us to try a little something different, if there's something you want to know more about, or you'd like to see us compare these 3 movies together, let us know. Drop a comment, and we might take that into consideration. But without further ado, House of Wax. House of Wax is the story of Jared, played by Vincent Price, and he is a sculptor. He makes beautiful wax statues for his little wax museum of historical figures, and he's very, very into it. A little too into it, perhaps. He likes to talk to them.
Yeah, he likes to talk to them. He likes to talk to them when people are still around him, which, is...
If you do that, don't.
Yeah, don't do that.
So, meeting people pro tip, don't talk to your statues. Unfortunately for him, despite the modest success that he's having, his partner in the venture is not happy with this. And he would like to just burn everything down and collect his part of the insurance money. Well, obviously, since Vincent Price, Jared, is a little too attached to his wax statues, he's not having any of that. And in the resulting scuffle, the Wax Museum is burned down with Jared still inside it. So we later cut to where we meet, I guess what I'd call the protagonist of our film, Sue Allen. She sees her friend brutally murdered by a deformed individual wearing a coat and a hat. She's all the more frightened when she goes to a new wax museum that has opened by our friend Jared, who is now stuck to a wheelchair and his hands have been ruined by the fire. And would you know it, the new Joan of Arc looks more than a little suspiciously like Kathy.
Her friend who was horribly murdered.
Yes. In a twist of events, Vincent Price's character, unable to make wax statues anymore because of his hands being ruined, has hired 2 lackeys, one of which we'll talk about a little bit more, is a deaf and mute man played by Charles Bronson, of all people.
Yeah.
Have been committing murders, including of that partner who did him wrong, and using them by dipping them in wax to make new statues, hence the new lifelike statues in his Chamber of Horrors.
That is something you sort of see in the film is, I mean, he's very obviously a little off, maybe more than a little off because he's talking to his statues, but part of, the reason his partner is upset about the wax business is because it's not bringing in enough people, and Jared he's not into all that horror nonsense. He wants to make historical figures and
happy scenes.
Mostly
happy scenes.
Joan of Arc is still on a pyre, but
she looks pretty cool with it on the statue.
Yes, he's more concerned about the art, and then post the fire, he's lost it, and he's down. He's down for a house of horrors. And it's funny because he's been killing people and then turning them into wax, but like different figures. His partner, he just turns his partner into a wax figure of himself.
Well, you see, one of his gimmicks is that he, supposedly would be going through the newspaper, and he looks at the recent crime section and creates those grisly murders in wax, which is easy for him since he's, responsible for most of them. We later find out that, of course, I guess we've already let the cat out of the bag, Vincent Price is the murderer. He isn't wheelchair-ridden, however, he is horribly scarred. And in one of the coolest scenes of the film, he has captured Sue Allen because she is going to be his Marie Antoinette. And she is fighting him back and hits him in the face, and his wax mask breaks apart, revealing that he is the scarred man that she saw murder her friend.
Yeah, and the makeup of his face is not stellar, I would say. But
it's just kind of different. I'm not entirely sure what they were going for, other than I guess to showcase that he's a burn victim, but it actually kind of takes away from some of Vincent's charisma in some of those scenes. But it's not terrible.
In the 60s on back, when it came to makeup and color, or for like injury, deformity, purple and just purple was quite the popular choice for this person is horribly deformed or scarred.
Grimace was very scary.
Grimace was very scary back then. And his face has definitely got that purple all over it.
It's a little too purple. That being said, we hope that you forgive it because Vincent Price had to endure about 3 hours of makeup routinely to film this.
And, that's the fun thing about special effects makeup. It doesn't matter if it looks good or like crap. It still takes hours and hours to do.
Now, it was funny because despite this being my pick, Bones had actually seen this more times than I have. And what was interesting is when I first got in, I don't like to research films ahead of time if I haven't watched them. Because I like to just go in blank and just enjoy the movie, at least for the first viewing. I think I had caught maybe part of this on an episode of Svengoolie, but I've never just sat down and watched the whole thing. So I didn't know when I was going into it necessarily that 3D was going to be such a big part of it. In fact, I didn't know it was a 3D movie. However, less than halfway through watching it and looking at the way the scenes were filmed, I'm like, oh, this movie is a 3D movie. Because there are some fairly gratuitous 3D scenes.
I mean, it does in the opening credits say filmed in natural vision 3D, but then again, when I see opening credits, I just sort of a fog rolls over. It's reasonable that you might not have noticed that.
Well, regardless of my oversight there, there's no way after watching it you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
There are some scenes where they are really just having fun with it, maybe even too much fun. One such scene, the first of the two, I think, biggest examples, is Vincent Price is opening up his new wax museum, and he has hired a barker to drive people in. And this barker is a guy with paddle balls, and he likes to, he's telling him about the horrible wax museum while doing all kinds of tricks with his paddle ball. But at one point, it feels like I don't know how long it actually is, but it feels like forever. He's paddling the ball right at the screen, and
it's literally, if you've ever watched like a cartoon or a show where they were making fun of 3D, this is what they would have shown to make fun of the 3D. It's like, look, it's coming right at you.
You know what? This is such a random aside, and this movie is even kind of, old now. I mean, not super old, but there was a movie called Monsters vs. Aliens that was also in 3D, and I think they literally did a paddle ball at the screen at part of it.
Yeah, probably.
Well, and it's funny because it cuts between things going on in the wax museum to him then there with the paddle ball.
Yeah, it's like there's some maybe not super important information being given inside the wax museum, but it's still, there's just a major contrast between, all right, this is the serious movie. Now here's a cool guy with paddle balls, and he's literally talking to the screen. He's like, "You with the popcorn, I'm gonna hit it out of your hands," and he's whacking it directly at the screen.
However, that's nothing compared to another scene, which I think was the absolute silliest use of 3D I've ever seen. So Sue is with her love interest, and they're talking about all of the things that she's been through, but they're doing it at some sort of club, and there are some can dancers, and they are kicking their legs as high as they can right at the screen.
Watching it, I was thinking, can is perfectly, all right to show in the 50s. There's so much worse that, you can't show. Can is fine. But the fact that it goes on and on and on.
Well, and we do see one of the girl's 3D keisters.
Yeah, yes, she just spins around and it's of course covered.
It's all roughly.
It's a roughly bum.
But it's certainly a little something.
It feels very racy for 1953.
Right. I don't know. The fact that it was in 3D about killed me. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah.
Now, for most of the film, though, outside of those scenes, there are some places where there is 3D used. But the movie, aside from those scenes, doesn't really use it gratuitously in other places. And I think a lot of this is because, interestingly enough, the hand-picked director for this film was a man named Andrei Titov. He was a Hungarian man, and most interestingly, he was a Hungarian man with an eye patch. You see, he only had vision in one eye, which means that he cannot actually see 3D.
Yes, you need both eyes to see this kind of, well, I'm going to guess with most 3D, you need both eyes.
Right. In fact, he was asked not to wear his eye patch on the studio in fear that the press would get in that they were making this 3D movie with a guy who couldn't see 3D, that they'd become a laughingstock. But regardless, he did a great job with it, I thought.
So another thing is, I believe critics later said this, but it probably did the movie some good that he couldn't see 3D, because I think he was more concerned with just making a movie that was good rather than, I mean, he definitely was indulging in the gimmick, but the movie for the most part is not just a paddle ball coming at your face.
No, and a lot of attention details put to a lot of like the scenes and the sets, so not constantly having your eyes distracted by, ooh, what cool new 3D effect can we do here, probably helped in the long run, especially since the most common way you're going to see this movie now is not in 3D, but in 2D.
Yes.
Now, I am not as versed in cinematography as my friend Bones here, but Bones actually knows a lot about filming techniques, and he also knows a little about 3D. Can you tell us about it?
So, real quickly, before I even get into the 3D, part of the reason this movie was filmed in 3D was because in the 50s, the boogeyman to every film producer is television. Television, everyone was scared television would completely dominate the entertainment industry, and no one would bother to go out and see movies because you can just sit at home and watch TV. So they were starting to come up with different gimmicks and film processes to bring people in. One thing was called Cinerama, which it's essentially a giant curved screen like IMAX, and they had 3 different projectors going, each one with more of the film, I guess. And so is, you get to see the film on the really big screen.
Well, and prior to this film, there was a small film called The Buona Devil by Arch Oboler, which you may not know that name, but it was significant to me in Bones because Arch Oboler has a name in that horror space of those early years of horror. And he had run for the longest time a radio show called Lights Out. But what was interesting is that this little film that was just made a year prior to this one really took off and made a lot of money. People were into this 3D gimmick. So when it came time around for this movie, they're like, okay, we're going to make a big 3D movie and it's going to bring people in.
Yes, and the 3D that was used on Buona Devil and then this movie was the same style. It was Natural Vision 3D, which was created by Julian and Milton Gunsberg, and I believe one or both of them were like screenwriters. Looking up how this happened, how they made this work, I was sort of surprised. I was like, I wouldn't expect these two to be the ones to come up with a 3D system. But Natural Vision 3D was this very big rig, and you have these 2 cameras slapped right next to each other. One for the left eye, one for the right eye. Now, it's hard to get the cameras close enough to work as 2 different eyes. So they had mirrors that would essentially bring the image closer together so it really could be a left eye, right eye. Then the rest of the camera is covered in what's called a blimp. It's like a giant hardcover case, and that's to mask the sound because these 2 cameras are very loud. And this rig is really big, so to move it, you need a crane or a forklift, which makes shooting certain scenes very difficult because, it's pretty massive.
The camera doesn't want to move too much.
The camera doesn't want to move too much. Now, 3D, at the time, you pretty much had 2 very popular styles. There was anaglyph and polarized. Anaglyph is, all right, 2 cameras, but one has, the film has a blue filter and the other has a cyan filter. And these are like your classic, red, blue 3D glasses. And the filters will cancel out the filter that's been put on the film, but it messes with the color. It's not the best.
Which would have really been a downer for this film because this film was a Technicolor film, and the color in this movie is absolutely beautiful. It looks just the way that only a Technicolor film could look. The color wasn't done digitally or just recorded, it had to be added, but every color pops.
No, this is like classic color film where all of the colors are super overstated. But Natural Vision 3D, I believe, was the polarized style. So the left eye and the right eye are polarized at different rates. Then the left and right eye are superimposed on top of each other to make a whole new image. Now, the image is weird because there's 2 different polarizations going on. And that's where you get your glasses they're essentially sunglasses, but, each lens is slightly different than the other.
Right, well, and sunglasses are essentially polarized lenses. The idea is that the lens is going to allow in some wavelengths of light and exclude others. But in this case, each lens is doing is polarized differently.
Yes, and polarized to how the film is. And viewing it through the glasses, it causes the 3D effect. Now, since it was a polarized style, you had to have the silver screen. Back in the day, there really used to be a silver screen that movies would play on. It is actually probably aluminum or some sort of cheap metal that, was light. Even prior to 3D, they had those because, I'm going to assume they had those because the projectors, were not working with the most powerful of light, so you needed something that was reflective and, make the image brighter. Now you add sunglasses to the mix, and it's extra dark, so it has to be on that bright screen to help make it so people can see it.
Well, and this was a big deal because this was the first time a major studio had released a 3D color film. And it paid off for them, despite the fact that some of the critics at least were initially iffy with this one. New York Times didn't like it. Just going to show you that even back then, the New York Times didn't know what they were talking about. But critics have since definitely warmed up to it, but people at the time loved this movie. It was filmed on a budget of about $1 million and would go on to make somewhere
a little more than $23 million.
Right. In fact, I want to say closer to 24 than 23.
Yes.
So it was the kind of box office success that if every movie theater could get that kind of return on their investment, or movie company, I should say.
I'm a little curious with the critics. A lot of critics were not big fans when this movie first came out. And I almost wonder now if the reason critics look back at it and it's like, yeah, this is a good movie is maybe simply because of its historical significance. Not that this movie isn't good. I think this movie is totally worthy of the praise. But I think sometimes critics have a tendency to put on rose-colored glasses when it comes to historically significant films.
Well, and in this case, I would say that if they're wearing rose-colored glasses, it's only given them a correct view because their natural cynicism to horror movies and things that people enjoy has been corrected for.
Mm-hmm.
And I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I think this is a good movie and can recommend it without reservation.
Yeah, this movie, this is cult is king, but this movie's definitely past the cult film genre and definitely into this is a classic piece of horror cinema.
And this was a very important film, not just for the studio, but for Vincent Price. If you know Vincent Price, and I imagine many of you do, if not, what you would know him from is his dabbling in the horror genre. He was a mainstay of it for the 50s, the 60s, and even some 70s pictures. He was in The Fly. He was in House on Haunted Hill. He was in The Abominable Dr. Phibes.
Dr. Goldfoot and his, bikini...
And the Bikini Machine.
The Bikini Machine.
And its sequel, Dr. Goldfoot and the Girl Bombs, which I'm sure we'll cover those at some point.
They're really the height of cinema.
Really the height of cinema. But anyway, the point is that that's what you think of Vincent Price as a horror actor. Prior to this film, that was not his reputation. His closest brushes with horror he was in one of the Invisible Man movies.
Yeah, the second one.
And he wasn't really a monster in that film so much he was a protagonist who, the formula was driving him crazy, but he's very much the good guy.
It's a much happier version of the Invisible Man, I would say.
He also, at the end of Abbott Costello Meet Frankenstein, his voice, I guess, in there was there as the Invisible Man. But prior to that was pretty much it. He'd played some villains and stuff before, but he was not a horror actor. Well, this movie completely revitalized his career. Suddenly he was a big deal. And I mean, it would go on to feed into him getting cast in all of those movies we just talked about. And unlike a lot of people who, resent being typecasted, from what I can tell, Vincent leaned into it and made a career out of it. And honestly, I think he had a lot of fun on the way.
I mean, watching all of his movies, it feels hard to watch and think that he wasn't having at least a little bit of fun, but he was definitely like a professional through and through. There's not uh, a low budget horror movie he was a part of that he didn't just give 200%.
Well, and I mean, that's the thing that really makes Vincent special. I mean, even when he's being campy or he's in a movie that's obviously silly, he's still hamming it up, or in some cases, actually, because the thing is Vincent Price knew when to ham, but he also knew when to have like a serious, performance. But regardless, he's always giving it 110%. Like, I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe he's just that good an actor, but I was always under the impression whenever I'm watching a movie with Vincent Price that he is having more fun than anybody.
Yeah, and he definitely took to, the horror genre and being typecasted. I know, Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi wanted to be a lot of things apart from Dracula, and it's kind of sad because like Bela Lugosi was legit funny and very talented, but his
Dracula was too big.
Dracula was too big, and his accent was too Hungarian, and so he never got opportunities.
By the way, if anybody ever tells you that the old Dracula has a cheesy accent, that's a very real accent, and they don't know what they're talking about.
He never, ever lost that accent his entire life. He always sounded like Dracula.
And then, of course, he was actually not the only notable in this movie. This had a pretty good cast. We've talked about Sue Allen. She was played by Phyllis Kirk. And the place I knew Phyllis was from, there is a musical that was made in the 50s called 2 Weeks with Love that I had grown up watching. It was just one of the movies my family had. And she plays the rival love interest in that movie and does a good job of it. And then she would actually later go on to work with Toth again, I think even later in this year, 1953, in a Western called Thunder Over the Plains. What's interesting to note, too, is despite this being, a studio horror flick, Toth was actually most known, I think, for his Westerns. He filmed a lot of them.
Apart from Sue Allen, her roommate, Kathy, who dies, was played by Carolyn Jones. And Duke, what was Carolyn Jones in?
Well, you see, gentlemen, Carolyn Jones was the first goth GF, as she played more... I just killed a little bit of something inside of Bones, I think. But she played Morticia on the Addams Family, the original Addams Family. So that was kind of a big deal, but that's hardly the only movie she was in. She had a pretty... I mean, all the actors in here, for the most part, had dozens of movies that they were in, but some noteworthy ones that she was in were films such as The Man Who Knew Too Much, The 7-Year Itch, and of special note to people who are interested in these type of movies, Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
I guess it kind of shows her acting range, because Kathy in this movie is this giggly, like, ditz.
Yeah, no, she's a complete, like, goofy airhead, which... if you can, contrast that now with Morticia Addams and, her like serene, graceful, understated personality.
And until I saw on the IMDb that she was Morticia, I would have never, ever put the two together.
Right. No, until you told me that, because I was doing some research there and somehow I missed it because I wasn't looking at TV. I'm like, oh, really? So that was interesting. And then, of course, the other most noteworthy, I should say, like I said, everybody in this movie was in something. But obviously Charles Bronson, this was an early role for him. It wasn't his first role by any means. He'd been in a handful, but it's weird seeing him so young because as he'd get older, he would become a much bigger star, especially with movies like Death Wish.
Well, I mean, Death Wish is like probably both of our favorite Charles Bronson movie, I'm assuming, but...
actually, he's close, but The Great Escape.
Well, you see, that's the thing is, my brain always goes Death Wish, but it's like probably more people think Magnificent Seven and Great Escape, and all of these other super classics.
But I do love me some Death Wish.
Again, that was another case of, unless I had seen or hadn't seen the opening credits, I don't know if I would have really connected with me that he was that was Charles Bronson on the screen, because he just looks like such a caveman.
He does. He has that brow, and he's big. And actually, it's funny because his character in this movie is literally named Igor. And what I'd like all of you guys at home to know is, if you haven't seen it, the original Frankenstein movie, or the Universal one, there is no character named Igor, nor is there one in the book, but there is one in House of Wax.
Yeah, well, I'm, son of Frankenstein. We get the Igor, but
Even then, that's not... I want to say his character in Son of Frankenstein was a hunchback. Bela Lugosi plays the Igor in that one, but he's actually like a evil genius as opposed to like the servile, like timid Igors we usually get.
I think what it is everyone just remembers Young Frankenstein.
Well,
and
that's probably
Young
actually.
Frankenstein is just what people think of.
There's no Igor in that movie. It's Igor.
Whatever. But yeah, Charles Bronson, he definitely, just young him and old him are so different looking.
Well, and I will say this too for Vincent Price in here. This movie revitalized his career, but he earned his money in this movie. Not only would he undergo 3 hours of makeup to be transformed into the burn victim version of himself, but he had to do his own stunts in this movie, particularly the dangerous ones in the scene early on when the wax museum is on fire. For whatever reason, between the rig or the set, there wasn't going to be an opportunity for a stunt actor and then to cut back to him. And because of that, he had to do his own stunts, which involves being on this set, which is on fire.
Well, I think the thing about, not being able to, have a stunt double with, especially with that house on fire scene, is because they're burning down the wax museum. There's all of these wax dummies. It's expensive to make wax dummies, especially nice ones. So you only get to burn them down once. And so you can't afford to be setting up a shot takes a lot of time. And you just don't have that time when things are on fire. And to make matters worse, they set, I believe it was like 3 controlled fires that quickly became uncontrolled fires.
Yes, this turned into a whole mess. I think I was a lot of the information I pulled on this came from a article from Turner Classic Movies. Their archives there. There's an article by Lang Thompson and Jeff Starford, I believe. Sorry if you're from TCM and I've messed up your name. I really do care. You guys made this really easy on me, but he was talking about how he had to run under the flaming balcony and he was terrified.
Well, I mean, I noticed in one part during this scene, he's fighting with his, the manager who's burning the place down, and the manager punches him, and Vincent hits a railing, but the railing doesn't break, and then the guy has to hit him again to get it to break. And I think it was probably supposed to break the first time. And there's tons of fire everywhere, and it's definitely very close to Vincent Price, who has to throw himself through this railing that won't break for him.
Yeah, I don't know how much he made, but whatever it is, he was worth it in this movie. Because that was just wow. And I have to say, though, despite the uncontrolled fire and all the difficulty, the scene came off really good. There was a scene where all the wax dummies are in there, and I mean, they had to actually make wax museum dummies. Not quite wax museum qualities, but they looked good. But as the fire's raging, you see their faces melting off, and it's actually kind of a creepy scene. It's a very striking scene.
It's gruesome. I mean, what it reminded the both of us of Raiders of the Lost Ark, the face melting scene in that. And that wasn't wax, that was, I believe, a fast melting gelatin.
And those are supposed to be real people, and this was just supposed to be dummies, but wow.
It felt like a precursor, almost like this was them discovering the face melting effect.
And I'm sure to Jared, to Vincent Price's character, they were real people.
Man, I mean, it is creepy because although they look like people in an uncanny valley way rather than a really nice wax museum style, but I mean it's still people's faces melting off and their eyes are bulging and also on fire. It's if you added red wax to it, it would be quite graphic.
It certainly would. No, I really liked this movie. This one's an easy recommend for me. Just a classic.
Yeah, no, this is definitely a recommend if you are interested in the history of movies, if you're interested in Vincent Price,
or if you just want to have fun and watch something that's fun to watch, this fits the bill.
Yes, this fits the fun category.
Well, and I mean, there's a lot of things that, we like cult movies. One thing I like to say a lot is the only thing better than a good film is a very bad one. But for this one, there's a lot of stuff here that you don't have to worry about or overlook. It's incredibly well acted. It's directed competently. The sound is good. I didn't realize what a big deal it was, sound in movies, until I started watching some of these older films where it was horribly mangled.
Yeah.
So,
when you watch Robot Monster and the music and everything is just auditory torture.
Right. Well, and this is also just a fun film because there's like a mystery element to it. There's a horror element to it. And there's also a little comedy thrown in. Not too much to hurt the film or ruin the tone, but enough to keep it light and fun. It's very much an easy watch.
Well, I don't think I have much else to say about this. Do you have anything else on your mind?
Not that I can think of. I think we've pretty much gone through everything.
Well, I guess that should lead in now to what we're watching next week.
And if I remember right, that's your pick, Bones. What do you got?
Well, yes, you're darn right. It's my pick. We're going back to the 80s. We're going to be talking about Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Oh, now that's a classy picture.
Yeah, there's a video game that is, God willing, will come out this year. And so it's been on my mind.
Well, and I have to warn you, Bones is the editor, so if this game is good, if videos start to take longer to come out, that's why.
Yeah, it's probably true. But yeah, and thank you to all listening. We are now on 3 different platforms, YouTube, of course, Castbox, and Odyssey. We've actually been on Odyssey for a little while now. Neither of us have decided to plug it, but we're plugging it now.
We are. So if you are our one listener who prefers Odyssey, you are appreciated. We love you.
You are loved.
You are loved and treasured.
But yeah, thank you for listening.
Right. And if you'd like to keep listening, don't be afraid to hit the subscribe button. But, we are putting these out almost every week, so if you want to stay caught up and not miss them, that's the easiest way. So, with all that said, good night. Look forward to seeing you next week.
And goodbye.